You are listening to the Unnormal Paranormal podcast with historian and folklorist Shannon Jones in A Virtual Victorian Ghost Story Museum, Part 2 of 2. Didn't they invent something called the chastity belt?
No, that's way earlier.
That is way earlier?
Yeah, it's way earlier.
Yeah.
They have all sorts of crazy electronic devices that if you think I'm getting too R or even X-rated, let me know. Didn't they invent the vibrator during the Victorian era? An electronic one?
That I'm not quite sure about. I can tell you that similar, non-electric items have been around for centuries.
Shannon, can I just take a moment? I've known Jeff
You're too
for
far away to
30
slap
years.
I swear to God, they invented something electronic.
Go figure. That's what you
to
remember.
excite the female species. And back then, they didn't know too much about grounding techniques. And I'm like, do you really want to run 120 AC to your private parts? I'll take this out if you want me to. I'm done with that.
Oh, no, it's fine. I actually just kind of looked it up.
There you go.
And I found something that says the first electromechanical vibrator was invented in the late 1870s or early 1880s. But it was to vibrate the human nervous system to stimulate ailing nerves.
Oh, of
but
course.
We're humans. If we're going to be stimulating ailing nerves, we're going to use it in other places.
I've got Rhonda coughing. I think that's a good thing.
No, I just went and gave him a high five when you said the time frame, and it was like, okay, he's in the right time frame. Like I said, he and I have been friends for years. I may slap him silly later on, but probably not. So anyhow.
Well, one more thing I would like to add about the Victorian era and some of the occult ideas from this time period. Can also keep in mind that Queen Victoria she was the queen of a lot of things. You know, you got England and the whole United Kingdom area, Canada, Australia, and also she was the Empress of India. And so all the different religions and ideas that were in India are now making their way to Victorian England as well. I mean,
probably through their wars.
Yep, there was wars, and then you had uprisings, because the British seemed to bring out uprisings in different areas. So there's a lot of kind of occult ideas that come from the East during this period, but a lot of it's kind of dubious history. Like, you'll hear things coming out about yoga and all this different stuff, but I don't have all the facts behind it to give you definite answers. There was one big thing that came from this time period. Now I can't think of what it was, but my brain wants to translate it to snake oil salesmen.
Yes.
So probably the same idea. It's hard remembering everything.
It sure is.
Thank God that neither Jeff nor James nor I have to remember everything, and we're not calling you that you have to remember everything
I told you that Shannon offered a cornucopia of
I was
everything.
So psyched to have a chance to speak with you. And, I mean, I don't know if this will stay in or get taken out, but when I read, just trying to remember about Blavatsky and finding out she and whoever her sidekick was, and they went to India and they studied Hindu, but then they ended up being two of the first people ever to become Buddhists in the U.S. I'm thinking, okay, that kind of gives me a headache just to think about it. But I find it interesting that when we look at spirituality, whatever that encompasses, it tends to open all kind of doors. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. I mean, it depends on like what you're branching your spirituality off of, but there's a lot of potential to learn about other things and learn new beliefs and also adopt those beliefs as well.
Yeah, we still have some problems with that. For instance, you mentioned yoga a few sentences ago. I know that there are still some people who brand yoga as a door to the occult, whereas I see it as a way to help ailing joints, lose a little weight, relax your nerves, lower your blood pressure. There are still people out there who think that yoga opens up a passageway to the occult and to stay away from it.
Yeah, I've seen the list online.
Just a few.
I was going to say, I've seen the list online where they have like 30 things listed as doorways to the occult. And you can kind of go through and check them off like, yes, I've done yoga. Yes, I have used tarot cards. And it just goes kind of really downhill into really abstract things. I think some even mention video games as doorways to bad things.
You take away my Ms. Pac-Man, and you take away some of my video games that I play on my phone, we're going to knock heads.
I still have a version of Farmville on my phone, but now it's on an island.
I knew I liked you. I knew I liked you. So, given all that you've studied, all that you've learned, all the people you've talked to from disparate cultures, what would be some wisdom you would like to leave people with? Obviously, it can have nothing to do with the questions we ask here tonight because we're not very wise, but we mean well. But like, what is it that you have found about human beings that you'd like to impart to other human beings in terms of, hey, this is important?
I would actually kind of keep it very simple and just say, have an open mind, read books, do some research, and then do some research that goes against what you've already read. And kind of like weed through the middle of different ideas. To make one of the best ways I can describe researching and learning and then growing from information is when I was in grad school, I took a class on the wars of religion. I don't remember most of the class. It was not one of my favorites.
Okay.
But one of the professors had us read 3 different books on the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. One from a Protestant point of view, one from a Catholic point of view, and then one from an atheist point of view.
Wow.
And I just kind of use that as a reference point of, we have one event, we have 3 different sides of this event, depending on someone's background, religious beliefs. And if you weed through kind of all 3 of them, you can find more of a truth to the event and the matter. And I think a big thing for people nowadays is to look at the different viewpoints and not get stuck in one of those echo chambers where everything you research, it just falls in line with what you already believe and there's no differing opinions to it.
What was the St. Bartholomew's Massacre?
It was during a time period of religious wars, so it involves a marriage between, I want to say it was Henry II. Let me just double check before I give you the wrong name. So it took place in the 1500s. Sorry, I had to think there for a second. It took place in the 1500s, and it was Catholics versus the French Huguenots. And if you've taken American history at any point in your life, I'm sure the French Huguenots have popped up because they make their way from Europe to the New World. And it's thought that this massacre was instigated by Catherine de' Medici, who was the Queen of France. Catherine is not remembered as an extremely well-liked queen in history, and there's a lot of bad blood between the two different religious groups. And it was the Protestant Henry of Navarre married, it was the king's sister, and following their wedding, a Catholic mob kind of broke out and started murdering the French Huguenots. Wow. I'm trying to remember all the details to it. Like I said, that was not one of my better classes. For some reason, the French and just wars of religion, and then in American history, the age of Jackson with Andrew Jackson and the War of 1812, I really just fall off on both of those. But that's kind of the general gist of it, that it was French Huguenots versus Catholics.
Okay. Kind of reminds me a little bit of my own family. I don't know if I should draw them into that. But in 1969, my sister, she's quite a bit older than myself. She married a Lutheran, a WASP. And I remember there was a little bit of consternation between both families, I think. And that was as late as 1969. So you can imagine centuries before that.
Right. Especially when there was so much animosity between Catholics and Protestants anyway during that time period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It always amazes me when I look at my own family tree or certain points of history, and it's like, oh, wow, this religion married this religion. Like, I'm actually really surprised considering other events that went around the same thing. I do believe that for Henry of Navarre to marry the French king's sister, that he had to convert, or at least pretend to convert to Catholicism for the wedding to take place.
Okay.
Jeff and I are kind of looking at each other right now because we have been friends for 30 years. And he's from a Catholic family. And I was raised Lutheran or Catholic light. And I'm like, man, my life was so much easier than yours.
Yeah, well, I don't want to make it about religion, but there is a certain, even topics nowadays in the contemporary world we speak of, I'll be thinking of things and I'm like, oh my God, should I really be doing this? Yeah, religion still does play a huge role in our lives today. There's good and bad to it, but we don't have all the answers, just like people back then didn't have all the answers.
Right. Although sometimes they thought that they did, and they tried to work off of that. But yeah, I've been at festivals to talk about folklore, and like I said, I do a mix of the medieval and the Victorian and the local. And I've had people come up to me and just tell me that I'm talking about demons. It's like, no. I mean, from my point of view, I'm not talking about demons. You know, I'm not bringing that religious aspect into it. I'm talking about stories and experiences that people have had. And for various reasons, I don't see this as something bad or demonic, but that's their point of view that they had to tell me about.
Would you like to come back on and talk to us again?
I'd love to.
I do have one last question, and this is something about going back to Pennsylvania. We're here in the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area, and you mentioned river pirates. I asked you earlier about the river pirates, and were they from the Susquehanna River? Because when we think of pirates, we think of Blackbeard and those guys make you walk the plank, and push you over and things like that. But Harrisburg, Pennsylvania had river pirates, and we do get local listeners. So could you explain who the river pirates were? And they're still not around nowadays, obviously.
No, but it's going to be a lot later than most people would probably think for them.
Okay.
So to kind of begin with, for the Susquehanna River, it does go throughout Pennsylvania, all the way up to New York. and then down to the Chesapeake Bay.
Right.
And there were your typical famous pirates kind of going through the Chesapeake Bay area. I've seen mentions of Captain Kidd being there. There was a Captain Turner that came through there. So that is kind of your starting point for the big names, if anyone is interested in them. But for the river itself and the Harrisburg area, river pirates kind of take on different forms. You have people who were attacking people traveling the river, because traveling up and down the Susquehanna was sometimes a lot easier than going over or along the mainland. And for the European settlers, it also meant if they went right down the river, they would not be coming into direct contact with the native tribes around here. And for some of them, that was better for them because of bad relations that come up throughout our history.
Right.
But beyond the boaters who would be attacked by pirates, we also had people who would use the river to go to certain areas. For example, we have Frank G. Hull, who went with a gang of what was called river pirates from the Harrisburg area, and they would take boats down to Lemoyne and get off to rob the freight train cars. And then they would bury their loot along the Susquehanna. And what's really interesting with Frank Hull is we're talking early 1900s for that group of river pirates.
That's back when you could get away with it.
I mean, he didn't really get away with it, but all of my information on Frank Hull comes from the old, like, Harrisburg Telegraph and the Independence and the old newspapers for the Harrisburg area.
And Jeff is somebody who has, and I have not followed him there, but the Harrisburg Telegraph is a paper he's gone back into so many times.
It's fascinating how the people lived back then.
It is. Well, if you ever get around to looking up this guy, there's one account, I think this one is from the Independence, and it dates to January 10th, 1906, where Frank Hull was sent to the Huntington Reformatory for burglary and larceny. That's kind of the headline of this article. And then after he paroled, it talks about him joining the river pirates and using motorboats to rob those freight cars in Lemoyne. And then they buried what they stole on an island on the Susquehanna. And the Susquehanna has many islands.
Yes, it does.
No idea where this was buried, if they dug it up, how much truth is to this story. I mean, it's in the old newspaper.
Well, I would think that if they're reporting it in the newspaper, it would be factual, right? Who knows? But I do have a metal detector, and Rhonda's looking at me, and she's shaking her head.
No.
I would love to go onto the islands of the Susquehanna River and just do a sweep and see if you can get some gold. Come on, guys.
You get a boat and you figure out a way to get out there.
Currencies.
I mean, you never know what you're going to find because, according to the newspapers, Hull buried the things he stole from the freight cars on the islands, and then he was caught and sent out to Eastern State Penitentiary. So if you're familiar with Pennsylvania Ghost...
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah. Eastern State has many stories, and he ends up getting out from Eastern State. He robs a bank and goes up to Ohio, where he's shot and killed by police up there.
I love this
And
guy.
he was killed in 1914. So like I said, it's a lot later than what you would think of for pirates.
Right, but I mean, the guy was enterprising. He was daring. I wonder if he was from Harrisburg, and if he was from Harrisburg, if he came from, I don't know if you've ever heard of the old 8th Ward in Harrisburg.
Yes.
It was an area that was so decrepit and so dangerous, they had to tear it down.
Yeah, like I said, I pulled this information from the old newspapers, and they didn't give a lot of background on him that I ever saw. And even trying to research him, there's not a lot on his background. He just becomes this famous kind of burglar and bank robber.
Right.
And then ends up dying in Ohio.
Okay.
And one of the big stories with him is that he had $13,100 that he had stolen that they could not find.
Wow.
And I didn't see.
God.
And that's in 1914 money.
Guys, we're going.
Yeah.
I'm only half serious, but I mean, it's just
No, he's 100% serious.
going there and doing some sweeps. Of course, you got to watch out about Harrisburg. The Susquehanna has a lot of undertow.
Yeah, it does.
And you have to be semi-skilled with a boat to get to these islands.
And I just don't do boats. Nope, me and boats, we do not get along. I do not do boats.
And then if you come up past Harrisburg towards Halifax, we have more kind of river pirate stories that they're more legendary than historical. And I'm not sure what your time limit is for the podcast.
You can go ahead and lay it on us. That would be fine.
Okay. So in the 1700s, American Revolution and the French and Indian War time period, that was also another big time for river pirate stories in this area. But they're more legendary than historical. And if you go up the Susquehanna, it's towards New Buffalo, if you're familiar with the track. Okay.
That's about 20 miles north.
Yep. And it's along 11 and 15. There's a giant cliff called Gertie's Notch that is supposedly tied to river pirates, and that was another area that they used to hide their gold in and whatever else they stole. But with that one, that dates to the 1700s, so I want to say probably a lot of the good stuff has already made its way out of there. But with the legend, it goes back to a person named Simon Gertie, whose family, his father came over from Ireland and settled north of Harrisburg. And there's a lot of information put out about the Gertie family, and then there's other information that contradicts what's out there. But with the legend that I heard, Simon Gertie's father was killed in a bar fight around Fort Hunter in Harrisburg. And then his mother remarried, and something happened to their stepfather. And there's various legends behind it where they all deal with him upsetting Native Americans, and then his children and stepchildren were divided up among the varying Native tribes around here. One of the boys went with the Seneca, and Gertie was supposed to go with the Mingo tribe, which connects to the Iroquois Confederation, I believe. And he becomes a Native interpreter that was around during the French and Indian War and American Revolution. And he's also considered a traitor to the American cause, because he was on the British side, and then during the French and Indian War, and the American side with the Revolution. And the legend says he betrayed his friends and was robbing people and storing the gold up in Gertie's Notch. history says he might have been a trader, but he was probably not storing his gold in Gertie's Notch. But following that, they say other people stored their gold in Gertie's Notch, and it's very hard to get to. There's no good way to drive to it. You can drive past it and see it. And then if we get into the ghostly aspects of Gertie's Notch, it's said that at night you can see lantern lights up on the cliffs, which are the ghost of the river pirates going up there to hide out from the authorities. So, sorry to be all over the place with that legend, but there's like the legendary part and then the history, but the history might not be the right history.
We're always all over the place.
Yeah.
And the thing about folklore, I guess it's maybe 50% factual and 50% hokum, right?
And you can also say the same thing about old history, because you can pull a source, but like, well, the source is old, but is it right? And it's always a toss-up of what you're going to get.
In the Harrisburg area, have you ever heard of the Paxton Street Boys?
Yes, I have, and I go to the Fulton Opera House like all the time, and they still have the door that leads into what was the old jail there for when the Paxton boys did the massacre of the natives that were in the jail.
Right. Now, didn't the Paxton Street Boys operate around the time of the American Revolution? Wasn't that the case? And they basically decimated a lot of the Indian population?
They did. They basically took out the remaining faction of Susquehannock natives from around the Chickies Rock, Lancaster area. And it happened in 1763, where they went in to the village and murdered a bunch of the natives that were in the village, and then the European neighbors of the tribe kind of rounded the rest of them up with the idea of protecting them, and they put them in the jail as not to imprison them, but to try and keep them safe. And the Paxton boys broke in and killed the rest of them. So it was a huge blow to what remained of the Susquehanna population in the Lancaster County area. It's also called, when we deal with Susquehannocks, you'll also hear the name Conestoga. So this is normally referred to as the Conestoga Massacre.
I'm sure that summoned up a lot of paranormal activity, because when you have wars like that and extreme violence, I'm just wondering if it brought a lot of bad juju upon the land and the people living there afterwards. And again, that would be folklore, you know.
I'm going to agree that it would. I've been to Chickies Rock several times to do EVP investigations out there. And I know it's not scientific, but it's one of the few places that always gave me a bad vibe to the area. And there's another place further down the river in that same general area that also kind of gives me creepy vibes. But it's something about that place. It just feels a little off. And when you look at the history of Chickies Rock and kind of the general area, I may be a little off on the exact location of the massacre compared to where I'm talking about. It's still Susquehanna region, central Pennsylvania, but Chickies has had such bad luck through history. It was at one point made into an amusement park, and there was a trolley accident there. There's been a lot of suicides in the area. When I did one of my EVP sessions there, I caught what sounded like a woman crying. I also heard the sound of drums, like native drums in that area. I'm trying to remember what else. It was definitely kind of a hot spot for EVPs. I'm struggling to remember what all they were.
Yeah.
See if I
It's funny you talk about Chickies Rock. My parents both grew up in Columbia.
Okay.
And so I was very familiar with the stories about Chickies Rock and it being haunted. And I went there one time with a third cousin of mine, which was the closest relative I had. She was a little older than me. And we went to Chickies Rock. We were teenagers at the time. And we heard drums. But we couldn't figure out where the drums were coming from or why we could hear them. And we ran in terror back to her car and drove to her mom's house. And she said we shouldn't go to Chickies Rock. Anyhow.
So you actually heard them.
We heard drums.
That's...
Yep. I've also heard drums there.
I've heard them. I've heard about them.
Yeah. We've gotten drum rolls on EVPs from Gettysburg, but we didn't hear them at the time. It was only later, upon listening to the recordings, that you could hear them. Not in real time, but here you actually heard it. That's just...
Yep, we heard... For me, it was an audible thing, not on an EVP recorder. It was an audible, you hear the drums. And...
Wow.
I did pull up, I have my list here of my EVPs that I caught at Chickies Rock. And when you're there, there's this, if you walk down the trails, there's this kind of cavern that you can walk through. It's a man-made tunnel that I think might have been connected to the railroad. But when I walked through there, on my digital recorder, I caught, it was a male voice saying, "I will make them pay for this." So it definitely has, I don't know what he was going to make them pay for, but it definitely has a different feel to that area.
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather spend a night by myself on the Gettysburg battlefield than go to Chickies during the day.
Well, that gives me a great idea.
We should go. We should totally go.
Would you like to join us?
Once it's not piss miserable cold outside.
We'd love to go out there with you sometime. In addition to having you on again, and we could narrow the focus to the more hauntings and things like that. Because
that's what I wanted to ask about. I mean, you, with all the research that you do into local folklore, both more terrestrial and also supernatural, I mean, you must have some pretty wild, crazy, paranormal related stories yourself. When you've talked about these EVPs that you have, I wouldn't be surprised if you had some photographs with interesting anomalous features in them.
The photographs are always my weak point. Somewhere I do have a video clip where it looks like there's a shadow going across a wall.
Cool.
Photographs, like I said, are not my best, but I have come across some amazing EVPs over the years, especially in areas that connect to the Civil War. That's such a big kind of like energy for...
It wouldn't surprise me that over the course of you studying history, some of the history that you're studying is actually studying you, because I'm good like that. It's alliteration. It makes me sound smart.
Now, I do try to to go to areas that have paranormal accounts and see what EVPs I can get, and also compare it to the history. And that's why I said sometimes the folklore and the ghost stories are all over the place, because you'll have like a historical account, then you might have a folklore account, and it doesn't quite add together. And even the history and the history accounts don't always add together.
The history matters.
Mm-hmm.
History matters. I mean, it is, the entire state of Pennsylvania is just haunted out the ear. In central Pennsylvania, what we did to the Native Americans as we migrated from east to west, that left a lot of really, really negative energy in this area. I mean, I've often considered central Pennsylvania to be a vortex of misery and suffering that I just can't escape from. But the energy out here is just so gloomy and oppressive.
But he's a lot of fun at parties.
I really am. You see how many golf balls I can stick in my mouth? It's 6.
I was going to guess 7. So
yeah, I'm not as young as I used to be.
Well, and not only just our history with the natives and just what happened with the colonists around here.
Yeah.
Because, also with like Halifax area,
Yep.
One of our moments in history is that one of the colonists that came here and he bought a lot of the land in the Halifax area. He was murdered by a Native American. By all accounts, he was probably rightly murdered. He was not the best person to read about historically.
No, he was not.
But it caused this whole... there had to be a trial, and Chief Shikellamy, if you know Shikellamy, like Shikellamy State Park area.
I actually am not familiar with the name.
Yep,
I'd remember a name like that.
He got involved, and the natives that were involved had to walk to, I believe it was Philadelphia, for this trial. I don't remember all the details of it because it's been a while since the story came up. But yeah, there was a big trial about it. But this is also talking about early 1700s history. So the sources are not always all there and easy to access.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have the native history, colonial history, and then with central Pennsylvania, you have places like Gettysburg that is a different time period, but also creates a lot of unfortunate energy from the deaths and tragedies that occurred there as well.
Yeah, I mean, is it any wonder that Pennsylvania is as haunted as it is?
Yeah, and the one thing that I know about Pennsylvania history and the Indians is that in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, they had the Carlisle Normal School or Indian School that they had.
I believe so.
That they sent Jim Thorpe to, and there was also a man named Bender. You ever hear of a man named Bender, Chief Bender?
It's a very vague note in my brain.
He was one of the most talented pitchers that ever lived in baseball. He invented what's called the slider. And both he and, well, you would know this better than I would, both he and Jim Thorpe were basically reconditioned into the white culture, but they came from American Indian backgrounds. And both of them experienced extreme prejudice during their lifetimes. Anyhow, I go on tangents and things like that. But Chief Bender, he's actually a good study. He was extremely intelligent and, like I said, one of the most talented pitchers that baseball ever saw.
Yeah, I have heard of the Indian schools, and I'm familiar with Carlisle. You lose me a little bit on the sports talk.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
We could switch to pro wrestling.
That's okay. He's lost me for years on the sports talk.
But anyway, I do realize that we've been on for over an hour now, and I think one is a sincere desire to have you on again, and also, do you have, based on that the hope that you come on again, is there anything that you would like to leave us with? Like, for instance, any links or
plug your
website or things like that, or where you're going to be speaking at?
We can put my website in there. Okay. That works. The Victorian Museum website. Okay. And I think that's the big one. I have another website for just like my personal history work, but I do not keep up with that one as much as I should.
You did also want a plug for something coming up in May, I think. You're about medicine and folklore. I'm trying to remember what it was that you had specifically said you wanted to talk about.
I'm glad you reminded me. Thank you, because I did say I wanted to put this in here, and then it flew out of my brain. Fort Halifax Park in Halifax is having their annual Fort Halifax Day on the first Saturday of May. I can pull up the hours for you. It usually runs about 10 till 4. But let me double check on that since you can edit it. And it's not showing it to me. So Fort Halifax Day, first Saturday in May. They usually post something on their website for it. I will be there to talk about the folklore and uses behind plants in colonial America. Since a lot of my talking and history lectures deal with medicine and plants and folklore, and really it all goes together fairly well, and even just trying to jump from the medieval world to the Victorian is not always a huge leap because they just keep using the same things over and over again.
I believe that would be called a quantum leap.
Yeah.
So, James, now here's our protocol. We have James who does our ending spiel.
I got a thing.
And can you still do it, James?
Of course I can do it.
All right.
You do it better than you do.
I've never done it.
I would love to see you do it.
No, thank you.
That's what I thought.
All right, big guy.
Here we go. And this is the part of the show where I remind everybody that all of our episodes are hosted at www.unnormal. What's that look for?
Huh?
What?
You give me a look like I got a third eye coming out of the middle of my forehead. www.unnormalparanormal.com. For free, completely for free. Anybody who charges you to listen to our episodes on another site is full of shit. And we need to know so we can sue them. Follow us on Facebook at the Unnormal Paranormal Community page. We are on Twitter at UnnormalPara. Like, follow, share our episodes around. Please, for the love of Christmas, share our episodes around. If you have questions, comments, you like us, you don't like us, you love us, you hate us. Did you miss Rhonda? Tell her you miss. Right, send us an email. Tell us your stories. If you have a guest you want to hear, a guest you never want to hear again, ask us questions. I will answer them myself, or I'll pass them along to be answered. If you have a question for Jeff or Rhonda, reach out to us at unnormalparanormal@gmail.com. Ta-da!
Thank you. Well done, James. Okay. Shannon, thank you so much for being on tonight.
Thanks, Shannon.
We hope you had a good time.
And we are really
that was a lot of fun.
We are really, really glad to have Rhonda back. It has been way too long.
It has been.
This was the big surprise that I've been telling people to expect.
Oh my God! You told people to expect this surprise, and it was me.
Yeah. Yeah, we're working with what we got, honey.
Okay. Well, you have a good night, Shannon. Okay.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you very much. You have my phone number and email, so shoot me a message anytime.
Okay.
Yes,
and I will thank you, and I will send a copy of this to you before we publish it. And if you have any suggestions or anything you want edited out, I can certainly do that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. Please don't shake my soda. Please don't shake my soda. It didn't do